All right. Well, so we'll be doing this in class, but I am making a video that we can use as a reference for stuff that we're covering. So in this review, we are going to be going over variables, specifically scope. Okay. So we'll talk a little bit about that, the difference between changeable variables and constant. And then we're also going to be talking about functions, how to do them, what they are, the parameters of a function, and accessing or calling the function. And then finally, we're going to be talking about simple objects, creating them, and calling the various properties. And we previously talked at the end of the course about using encapsulation, so we'll continue that conversation as we're doing that, explaining how we can use simple objects to simplify our code. While we're doing that, though, we are also going to review using the reference, and we're going to review using images. Okay, so all of this is stuff that we need to cover in this video, so it's going to be pretty quick. You guys use this to go back and forth as needed. All right, so let's first open up the reference. So we have our reference. We have our foundation of stuff. Specifically, we're using let and the const, but variables. Okay, now we've used variables already. Variables are a way that we can hold code. We can only hold one thing at a time. When we got into simple objects, you've seen that we could kind of hold a thing instead of just one piece of data. We could hold a thing that could be created from multiple pieces of data. And we used a let variable to do it. Okay, so when we wanted to create a variable, if we were doing, say, a global variable 1, we would define it outside of any blocks of code. Blocks of code were always defined as a pair of squiggle brackets. A pair of squiggle brackets you have seen on conditional statements, on different functions. They would also be on loops when we get to them. Class structures, so those are global variables, will exist everywhere because they're defined not in a block. A local variable will exist only inside of the block of code. So local variable 1, and this will exist only inside of the setup block of code. Okay, now JavaScript really does try to help you be able to access variables even if you're writing them incorrectly, which will kind of muddy up being able to do a good example of this. Okay, so when we, and I will walk through some examples, but when we create a variable, there are a couple different phases for creating a variable. The first phase, when I type the let keyword, I want to write my variable in camel case. This would be an example of the initialization phase. Okay. So we would use this when we want to, put a space on our computer or on our program aside to be able to call the variable name. Now, they're always written in camel case because the middle of it is forming a hump, which means that the second and every word after the first word needs to be capitalized. There is no spaces. Okay. Now, a declaration phase is where we actually give it a value. So here's another example of initialization phase. But if we want to give it a value, we could say local var1 equals 25. Okay, this is an example of the declaration phase. And this is really the initial assignment time, or the initial assignment for a value. Any other time, you're just reassigning. It's not the declaration phase. Okay, so when we create a variable, it's going to have initialization phase and a declaration phase. That can happen all at once. I could have, actually I can't write it like that. I can have it all happen at once. So say something like this: local var2 is 42. Okay, this is a initialization phase and a declaration phase. It's all happening at once. Okay. Initialization phase and declaration phase both occurred at the same time. Okay, so we did kind of go in that before. Helps if I spell stuff. And I'm going to provide this as a way for you guys to use as review if you need to. Okay, now if I, with a global variable, if I access to, declare a value, I can do that literally anywhere, okay? And I can put anything inside of a variable. What we learned previously is that variables can hold anything. They can hold strings, which could be a letter to an entire book, any type of number. It can hold Boolean values, which are true or false, and so we can use that to kind of branch our code and do all kinds of cool stuff. Okay, so I can access and call the variable anywhere. So let's say in the setup, I want to do console log what that variable is. So console log is so I can display it down at the bottom. Excuse me. And I can also change the value. So I could say global var1 is now Steve. And I can pull that up, excuse me. Okay, so let's see what that does. P is not defined. Okay, so what we see, I'm going to stop it now. We've seen hello display once. Why did that happen? Because in the setup, we gave initial value for global var1 as hello, so that was our declaration phase right there, and then we called it using console log code. So we displayed it here. Now in our draw repeats over and over and over after the setup gets called, and we changed it at the very last piece of code in our setup to Steve, and then we're displaying it. So we see that we are able to access that global var1 anywhere. What I cannot do, though, is I cannot try to access the variable global var1 before I've actually initialized it, because it will freak out. Okay, so this is if I hover over this, it's saying global var1 was used before it was declared. So there's an issue right there. But what about if I tried doing it before I declared it? I can actually do that. Let's see what that looks like. Without a value, it's undefined. It does not have anything. It does not exist. I have created that memory space and set it aside to put something in it, but for all intents and purposes, it is an empty box. Okay, that's why it's saying undefined, but as soon as I give it something right here, now that box is no longer empty and it's got something in there. Okay, so I can technically access before I've declared an initial value, but I cannot do it before I've actually initialized the variable itself. Okay, so that is an example of using global variable. We've seen that we could access it in setup and we could successfully access it in draw. Okay, now we have two local variables in our setup. Let's see what happens with those. So we've given some values. Let's do some console log to see that we can access those. Console.log. local var 1. I just noticed an error. Okay. And console.log local var 2. Okay. I'm going to get off some of the stuff since we're talking about global variables so we can see this. All right. So let's get off that one too. Just comment it out. All right. I gave for local var1, which is a locally scoped variable, because I used the let keyword inside a set of code blocks. That's this, from line 10 to line 23. The local var1 and local var2 exist, and I can access them and I can use them. Okay, so see here, I successfully accessed. Let's go and change that value. Local var1 plus equals 25. Okay, and then let's print it again. So we can set and do all kinds of stuff in there, and I have multiple values. Okay, so it started at 21, 25. I added 25 to it. I print it again. It's at 50, and I'm able to access. Now, can I do that here, though? Can I do this? Let's go ahead and see. Okay, that instantly gives me an error. Local var1 is not defined, and that's erroring on line 30. Okay, why? Because local var1 is a locally scoped variable. That means it only exists in between this code block. So as soon as I try typing anything out of this code block, it is giving me an error. Now, I could maybe do a global variable, and what you'll end up seeing, and it starts getting kind of convoluted, but I encourage you to go ahead and play around with it. If you make a global variable and a local variable and they have the same name, when you think you're trying to change one of them, you're only changing the one that's locally scoped in that area, and then your global one is going to stay the same, and it gets very, very confusing. So we really want to, if we're going to do this, where we're using local and global, we want to use very unique names. If you're using a variable that you want to just use as like a temporary variable, I would write the temp keyword in there to let you know that it's a very fluid variable, and that using it in a local way is okay. You wouldn't keep a temporary variable globally scoped. Okay, so that was really talking about the different scopes of variables, but now I want to show something else. So let's say we have a constant variable. Now, in all of these, when we're able to access them, we can make changes. But there are times that we do not want to be able to make a change to a variable. We want to set it, and that's it. Okay, and that is what the const keyword is. It stands for constant. It cannot be changed once it's been set up. Okay, so I will call this constant variable 1. And if I do not initialize right now, there is a problem, okay? It needs to initialize, and the declaration phase needs to be in one line. It has to happen together, because otherwise it's going to be declared as an undefined value, and then I can't change it. So unchangeable. Okay, so this is fine. Let's get rid of the other error that we have. Local var1 is not defined. Line 31. Let's cancel that one out. Will produce an error. Okay, I forgot to write that. All right, so we have our constant variable is unchangeable. Okay. I can access it anywhere. So this is useful. I can go console.log, and I can access constant var1. I can access that. Let's see what it's going to say. It says unchangeable. That's what I want. But what I cannot do is I cannot do constant variable 1 equals I am changed. This will produce an error. Okay. Attempting to override constant variable 1, which is a constant. Let's go ahead and try. it gives me an assignment error, okay? Because I cannot assign, like what I'm trying to do on line 15, to something that is a constant. That's why we use this keyword. When we create it, it makes it so it cannot be changed, okay? So it will result in an error because you cannot change a constant. Okay, so those three types of variables, we can have local, global, and any one of those can be a constant variable. I can do a local constant variable. I can do a global constant variable. Most of the time, you're going to end up seeing them as global constant variables. This could be things like maybe the max size of a player, the minimum size of a player, the max amount of health that you want any player to have, or maximum amount of points, or any of that stuff, stuff that you don't want it to change. And then you can change your other variables to those constants and use those. So if we wanted like one variable for our entire game to manage character and enemy sizes, we could create a size value for our game that could be a constant. So it would not change. It would stay a very reliable size. And then if we identify that we need it to be changed, then we would change it where it was initially initialized and declared. Okay. So that is the difference between changeable variables and constant. We have just learned let. Previously, we're talking years ago, the var variable keyword basically broke let and constant to one thing, and it's kind of a bad methodology to use. So that's why I've only taught you guys let, but now I'm introducing const. So we could use this for like pi values, things that we do not want to change. Okay, so now let's kind of look at functions. We have used those in the course. And the ones that we commonly see is the setup function and the draw function, okay? Now, each one of these, there are certain components that we need to see, okay? A function needs to start with the keyword of function. That's if it's just, scoped like this. When we start using it in the classes and when we start using it in simple objects, it'll be a little bit different. So when it's basically a global function that everybody has access to, global function, then we're going to use a function. Now, we need to follow it with the name of the function. And then inside the parentheses is the parameter. So that's the requirements that I would need to be able to do the function. Here's the parameters, which are the required items for... okay, so these are the required items for running the function or the method for running. So the setup, it doesn't require anything to run, so we don't have anything in there. The draw doesn't require anything to run, so we don't have anything inside of the parentheses. So the parameters can be optional, all right? But when you do create a function, you are going to need them. So let's say that I wanted to create a function that is called draw shape, and I wanted that shape. I'm saying I don't need any parameters, and what do I want to do? I want to create a, let's create a green circle. So I'm going to fill this with 0 red, 255 green, and 0 blue. And I want to do a circle, and I'm going to do it at the mouse X and the mouse Y position. So these are examples of built-in variables that we've used before. Mouse X and mouse Y, and I want it to have a size of 100. Okay, so I have created a function. When I go to run it, nothing happens, okay, because you have to call a function. So an example of calling a function is writing the exact name with the parentheses and providing it any required items that it needs. So this draw shape does not need anything, so I'm just typing the name exactly as I see it. It's case sensitive. Okay, so there is my draw shape. Now, because this is happening in the draw, it's happening over and over and over, so the shape is moving with me. But if I was calling this here in the setup, because the setup only runs once, it will basically do it once, and then the background is getting drawn on top of it. So we'll just see it as a flicker. So see right there, that was a flicker. Now, a way that we could see this a little bit better is if I slow down the frame rate. So let's slow it down to like 1 frame per second. Okay, so even though I'm moving, it wasn't moving. It just gave my initial location. That is what that draw shape is if it's doing it in the setup. But if I'm doing it in the draw, it's constantly getting repeated, but I still have a very slow frame rate. So once every second, once it updates, it's going to just look for that current mouse position and then draw that shape. Okay, if I was not clearing with the background, we're going to see that I'm drawing the shape once every second, and we're just filling up. So even though I'm moving my mouse a bunch, it's just pulling that one every second. Okay, so that is an example of using a function. Now let's play around with this and actually give it some parameters. How about I want to give it some different color shapes. Let's give it some different requirements. So we're going to say the first requirement is the amount of red. Second requirement is going to be the amount of green. So I need to actually write a variable for this. So I'm going to do R, G, and B for red, green, blue, and then I'm going to do size. So I got 4 parameters. If I try to run this right here, this draw shape, without giving those, I'm going to get errors. Okay, let's look. But it's still doing it. Hold on. That's because I didn't change these. So let's go ahead and change these. So we'll make them as part of those requirements. We need a red, a green, and a blue. And here, instead of saying this, is a size. Now this would be these parameters when we're creating them. They are like local variables. They only exist inside of the block, and then they don't exist anymore. So when I use the parameters and I'm calling that function, I need to pass in the values that I want to take place and be assigned to these 4 different variables. And if I don't, I'm going to get errors. Okay, circle was expecting number for the third parameter, received an empty variable instead. Okay, that's because I can't draw a circle with nothing there. Okay, so how do I do this? Well, in my draw shape, I give it the values. So maybe I'm going to do like what we were doing, red, green, blue, and then we'll do 100. Okay, I have passed in values. 0 is now being temporarily assigned as a local variable to R, and that's filling here. 255 is being assigned as a temporary variable to G, and it's being assigned here. So I see it now. Okay, now what I can do though is when I'm drawing the shape, instead of me drawing, let's say here, I want to draw multiple shapes. Okay, because I'm passing in a function, maybe I might want to do a red one. Or let's do a purple one. Purple one, a green one, and the purple one I want to be smaller. Okay, now I'm calling this. I'm going to see 2 of them, and they're drawing at the mouse location. And it's, every frame it's like resaving over. Okay, so this would be an example of me passing in parameters. Okay, I can pass in the parameters, do algorithms on it, all kinds of stuff, and build my programs. Okay, so that is doing functions. Now, simple objects we've learned is, well, what if I don't want to just use functions or to individually draw each little shape? If I wanted to do like a bullseye, then that is a simple object. And we're going to be building off of simple objects to get to doing class structure and actually create like full-blown objects that we can reuse that code in many different ways. So let's just call it, bullseye. That's going to be my simple object. Okay. In the setup is where we want to define it. So we want to define a simple object. Define a simple object. Ideally, you want to do this in the setup function. Setup function. But it provides us some different ways that we can work around data because we can take a simple object and we can use it to build much more complex behavior. So I can say bullseye, and I am using the assignment operator and then a set of code blocks. This is what's going to say everything in here is my object. So my object can have parameters. Inside of a simple object, we're using our parameters or our variables, and we're using semicolons when we're assigning. So I can have an x, and the x might start out, say, at width divided by 2. Okay. And then I separate each parameter or attribute of my simple object. So this would be an example of like an attribute. Functions could also be an attribute. Color could be an attribute. But I separate them with commas. So see this? If I don't have the comma, it's going to error out. I have to use semicolons. So this is different than us doing, using the assignment operator because we're doing it as a simple object. Okay, so I can give it a position. Let's do a size. Let's do a color. And we can use the color variable function. So let's do 255.0.0. And then we can give actual functions as part of the attributes. And so to do that, we can write, say, draw, and I can write my variable if I needed anything inside of there for my parameter. And then this is my code block for the draw function. I might need an update function. And inside of the update function, I'm going to do something. So what am I going to do in my draw? Well, this could be where I'm actually doing like a full-blown bullseye. And I want to draw, like, let's say 3 concentric circles. So maybe I don't want the color actually here. So I'm going to take that off because that wouldn't make sense. We're going to just do black, white. Black, white. All right, so we start off with a circle, and we're going to do this as like the largest size. And so I'm drawing in terms of the back of the canvas to the front. So I'm going to do fill. Let's do black, and then circle. And we're going to go at this.x because when we want to talk about this parameter or this attribute, I need to use a this. Because I'm talking about this x, this y, the y and the x of the bullseye. Okay, and then I'm going to do it this dot size. Okay, I don't need to stop there though. I can basically copy these lines, and I'm going to make smaller and smaller circles. So we'll do white 255, black, white 255, and then each one I'm going to shrink. So this would be minus 20, minus 40, minus 60. That's black. Minus 80. Let's see what we got. All right, so that bullseye, that's my draw. And then when I call it, so I can call, instead of doing this draw shape here, so let's comment this out now. And that's just calling that function. But now we want to call the bullseye, and I let the bullseye draw itself. That's one of the beauties of this, is that I am encapsulating the information to make it easy. The bullseye can draw. I don't need to care how it's drawing because that's all part of the bullseye's draw function. Okay, so there's my bullseye. Now it's drawing, and it's drawing wherever that previous x is, but I can do an update, and maybe my update is this.x equals mouse x, and this.y. Because I'm inside of the function and not part of one of the attributes, then I got to use my normal syntax, mouse y. Okay, so this update, I wrote it. It's not doing anything because I actually have to give that information. So if I need to call that function, I need to write it down. Okay, so this right here, bullseye, I need to spell it correctly, bullseye. There we go. Now I'm going slow because I'm doing only 1 frame a second. There we go. So let's see it with the frame rate not slowed down. There we go. There's our bullseye. Now, maybe I want the update to do, let's play around with this. Let's make the update have to have a random size. Okay, let's say random size between, let's say 100 and 150. So it will kind of grow and shrink a little bit. And then every time we call the update, what do I want to do? I'm going to pull this. That's my new variable that I'm passing in information. I'm passing it in right here. This is going to be my new size that I'm temporarily giving. And then I'm going to say this.size equals whatever that new size is. So this might flicker a little bit. Let's see what it is, though. That's kind of crazy. I don't know if I like that. Okay. Maybe we might want to, instead of size, we want to do a color. So this is where we had that color. So we got white. Let's go ahead and add a color to it. So let's say color. I just need to give it a default one for now. So I'm giving a default black. I'm going to have to split each one with a comma. So then instead of here, I can say this.color. Copy this and paste this in each spot. All right, so there is those 3 pieces. Now instead of doing here, I'm going to change this to new color. And I'm not changing the color. I'm not changing the size. I'm changing the color. Okay. Now, what happened? We need to go look at what we called for this color when we did our update. So here we updated with a random, and because we only put 1 value, it only did grayscale. So if I wanted to do now for red, green, blue, I need to pass that in because it's treating that as this color variable right here. So instead of just passing in a value, I'm going to pass in like this. So we can customize, is what I want you guys to pull from this into whatever we want. So I'm going to do 0 to 255 so we can have bigger variation in green and blue. 0 to 255. And then you finish with an extra set of parentheses. There you go. Okay. So I'm going to pass in a random color to my update. That color in my update is going to get updated as my color attribute for my shape. And then when we draw, the ones that were black are now going to be some random colors. So it's going to be all in variation between the white. So now I have it kind of flickering different colors. I can slow it down again. Let's do maybe 5 so it's not so fast. Okay, so this is just a way that we can kind of simplify our code. Our bullseye, I mean, I can minimize it. This is all doing its own thing. I don't really have to worry about it so much. I just let it kind of do its thing. We're going to be going from objects into doing class structures. So it's essential that you guys understand this. So what I want to point out real quick is that you guys are going to want to use the references, okay? So the references and the MDN site, we're going to want to look at that to see what type of stuff that we have. We've talked about functions. We've talked about variables. The MDN website for JavaScript is going to become one of your best friends for being able to pull up all kinds of different code. So I can actually just search for simple objects and see what they have for different objects. It's actually called object literals. There you go. Okay, so we could see different stuff of how they're building it, what it would look like, see example code. We could do all of this stuff. Okay, this is going to be, one of your best sources outside of the normal references that you guys just need to really get used to being able to read these. Okay, that's it for this video for reviewing variables. We reviewed variables, we reviewed functions, we reviewed simple objects. Okay, that should give you more than enough to be able to approach the very first project, just to make sure that you have an understanding of the material. All right, good luck, have fun.